Okay, sure. All right. So now we enter the workshop portion where we all work in a shop. Have any of you ever been in a workshop, in a creative writing workshop before? So you've like had people say mean things about what you've like poured your heart and soul into? Yeah, you haven't? They loved it? They just loved all of it? He's like, no, that's never happened to me. But I teach a lot of writing workshops on different things, from setting to different kinds of themes to dialogue, to both graduate students and undergraduates and community members. And I really like doing that because I don't think that, when we think of writers, we think of the person who like goes to Starbucks with the beret cocked to one side and a leather-bound journal and a huge quill pen, who like gets it out and wants everyone to know that they're a writer. And like, if you want to see a writer, you have to like break into someone's house in the middle of the night to see him sitting in front of his desk with a blank screen and just weeping, full of self-doubt. That's a writer. It's not the person who like has on too much cologne in the coffee shop trying to get girls to look at him because he's carrying a $40 journal from Barnes & Noble. That's not necessarily what a writer is. And I think so often we see writing as this very mysterious, very intangible, unapproachable thing that we can't do or we could never do, or we'll say things like, people say these kinds of things to me a lot. I'd write a book too if I had the kind of time you have. I've always wanted to write, or you should write a book about me. It'll be a bestseller. I'll split the money with you. And I'm like, if you get any closer, I'm going to headbutt you. So just stand where you are, So writing is not this unapproachable, impossible, romantic thing where you have to be Ernest Hemingway or, somebody off in a tower somewhere. But it's also not this very flippant thing where it's like, yeah, when I'm retired, I'm going to write a novel every 6 months. It's not that either. It's work. It's just like anything that you want to be good at, you just do it. And if you want to do it bad enough, you won't watch 3 hours of Real Housewives of Orange County, right? If you want to write a book, turn off the TV. Sorry. Turn off the PlayStation or whatever you're playing, or don't go out so much. Don't spend so much time doing things that are ultimately gonna make you a worse person, like watching Real Housewives of whatever county. But you have to make sacrifices, and you have to approach everything you want to do with a certain amount of dedication. If you want to be a really, really good basketball player, you have to play a lot of basketball. If you want to be really, really good at ballet, you practice ballet a lot. If you want to be a really good writer, you write a lot. You don't just crank out bestsellers, unless you're, James Patterson, and somebody writes them for you because they write beforehand. A lot of people don't know that. So I like to think about writing as this completely attainable, practical thing, and you do it. Sometimes you have a good day at work, sometimes you have a bad day at work, and sometimes you feel really good about it. But it's something that I think everybody can do, and I think that the craft of writing can be taught. I really believe the craft of writing can be taught. You can teach people story structure. You can teach people how to construct plausible dialogue. You can teach them how to progress a narrative, how to construct characters. What you can't teach is that initial spark of story, that initial spark of creativity. A lot of people will say like, I've got this killer idea for a novel about this plane that like flies on autopilot around the world. But then what happens? I don't know, that's just it. That's it. It just goes around. It's awesome, right? We're going to be rich. But it's more than that. It's really like bearing down and getting to the nuts and bolts of what it is that you want to do. And it's to make this big thing, this big idea about a plane flying around the world on autopilot as small as possible. So how can I make the bigness of the idea of a washed-up minor league baseball player kidnapping his two daughters, how do I make the hugeness of that as small as possible? How do I take the grandiosity of life and condense it down to moment-by-moment experience? Because it's so overwhelmed to get caught up in the largeness of things. And when reality, all we have is now. These individual moments, these small pockets of time that we let slip through our fingers so often. But the good news is we've got another one right now, and another one now. So let's do something. Let's do something with these little moments of now that we have in our hands. So I'm a writer who writes about place. My only two novels. That's my first two novels. My only two novels are set in North Carolina, one in Madison County, North Carolina, and one primarily in Gaston County, North Carolina. And I wrote about those two places because they mean something to me. I care about them, and I know them. I am not going to write a novel set in a foreign country. I don't know foreign countries well enough to unearth who their people are, what they value, what they care about. I don't know those places well enough. I'm not going to write a novel set in Charleston, South Carolina. I know this novel dips into there, but I'm not going to write a novel about people from Charleston who go do Charleston things, because I don't know Charleston. I lived in Lafayette, Louisiana for 5 years. I will never write about Lafayette, Louisiana. It's not in me. I don't feel competent and capable of writing about Lafayette, Louisiana. Now, are there things that I have to find out? Yeah. And This Dark Road to Mercy, the novel goes down to Charleston. I had to find a neighborhood near the air base to write about where Wade's mother lives. The novel goes into St. Louis. I had to find out a lot of things about St. Louis. So I tell people, write about what you know or what you can find out about. But I just don't know those places well enough to have people come from them. Funny story about St. Louis, This Dark Road to Mercy, if you've gotten that far in the book. It ventures very briefly to St. Louis. And in St. Louis, they love baseball. I don't know if y'all know that. They love baseball. Well, they have a reason to love baseball. They have the Cardinals, so they have a very good baseball team. And I had, on my book tour, I had an event in St. Louis. And I thought, this event is going to be crazy. I'm in St. Louis. My novel, part of it, takes place in St. Louis. I'm writing about Mark McGwire, who played for St. Louis. They had me on daytime TV with like this big news anchor, like this big special, writing about St. Louis. I was like, I am about to get rich here in St. Louis. That night at my event, I had 2 people come to the book signing. And so we went next door and I bought them dinner, and it's the best event I've ever had. We just stayed up. This is man and woman who didn't know each other. Maybe they went on a date after that. I don't know. And I think the guy just came along because he felt bad and creeped out that the woman may have to go with me by myself. He's like, I'm telling you, he seems crazy. So you never know what's going to happen when you go on the road. Last night at the event at Elon, the room set like roughly 2,000 people. And there was a good, maybe 75 people there, maybe? It was a great turnout, but one of the organizers said, we weren't expecting as many chairs. We don't want you to think the audience is small. It's still a great audience. I was like, look, you're talking to the wrong guy. Are there more than 2 people here? Or am I buying somebody dinner tonight? You know. So that's a fine audience. Last night was a great audience. This is a great audience too. But I'm a writer. I write about place, and place is very important to me. But place is so much more than setting, right? Place is so much more than setting. If we were going to write a short story set in this classroom, we would say, okay, it's a classroom. It's a tiered classroom, like a Coliseum-style seating. Okay, that's great. So the carpet is grayish, greenish, blue. There's some brown designs on the wall, blue paint, gray paint. There's a big screen, there's lights, there's no windows. Well, the door's open, so we can see that. But what could we garner just by looking around this classroom in terms of place? And you can yell it out, no? Unless you want to be called on.
It's an interior room in a university.
But how do we know we're in a university? We could be in a community center. Yes! Yes! This young man's going to be a detective. No, but he's exactly right. He's just using his powers of observation. He's exactly right. There's a sign right there that says, your success is our priority, Alamance Community College. Come here and look into a microscope and learn something about cells. I don't know, something useful, not like writing. Alamance Community College. What else tells? So we're on the campus of a community college. We're in a building on a community college campus. What else?
This is North Carolina.
There's a North Carolina flag, right? There's an American flag and a North Carolina flag. So we're in an auditorium on a community college campus in America, in the state of North Carolina, in Alamance County, right? So if we're writing a story set in this room, we don't want to say, it was a classroom in America, on a community college campus in North Carolina, in the county of Alamance. We don't want to say that because that's not how we tell stories, right? And when you write a story, you want your story to be as close to life as possible. So when I walked into this room today, I did not come in and say, I am white, I am 38, and I am a human man. I didn't say that. You saw me, and you probably thought I was like 25, right? But you saw me, and you made those judgment calls. And sometimes when we write and we create, we have to give the reader space to kind of make those judgment calls and make those assumptions. Sometimes, you ever heard the saying, when you assume, you make an ass of you and me? Well, sometimes making assumptions, it's okay to do when you're reading. Because readers are looking for footholds. They're looking for a vantage point from which to gauge the rest of the story. So think about when you have a dream and you're in your dream and you're like in a roller skating rink and there's like Barney the dinosaur and like your orthodontist and like some other crazy person and you're skating and you're like, where am I? Right? And you hear the music and it's like Belle Biv DeVoe's Poison, and you're like, well, I guess I'm in 3rd grade. That's what was popular, and you're just clamoring to find out, where am I? Well, when we open a book, we're entering a dream space. Writers try to create a dream space for you to enter, and as a reader, you're saying, where am I? So if you opened a book that was set in a room like this, the character may look around and note the flag. Maybe you would have the speaker, somebody like me, be bumbling and bump into the North Carolina flag and say like, gosh, I've never almost knocked a flag over before, or something like that. You know, we have these ways where we can ground the reader. How else can we ground the reader in a place, in a setting? What else tips us off here? The dialect, sure, yeah. If I dropped a y'all, right? I said, y'all know what I'm talking about. Let's go get some sun drop. You know. Or not everybody, most everybody would be like, sun drop? What is that? What else would ground us? Just to walk into this room, what else could we tell? There's an exit in case something's happening, sure. Well, that exit door, if we look out, we can see a little bit of daylight. So it's daytime, right? What's a better signifier of it being daytime? The clock on the wall says it's 3:30. So unless we're all here at 3:30 a.m., which I hope we're not still here at 3:30 a.m. for your sake, not mine. I can talk for a long time. But it tells us we're in America, we're in an academic building in North Carolina, in Alamance County, It's 3:30 in the afternoon. We're all gathered together on a college campus. It's probably during the week. It's probably not Saturday or Sunday. Is it cold outside? How do we know it's not cold outside? The air is on. What else? People are in shorts. They're wearing short sleeves. People have on sandals. So we know it's either early fall, late summer, spring. Perhaps it's the first warm day. Nobody's got their jackets laying over the seat. Nobody's got, heavy coats on. So we're able to glean. If we were to wake up in this room in a dream, we could look around and know where we are. What else would tell us something about this place? If you look around, maybe people have cell phones. Maybe you see that camera and you think, well, it's not 1985. Right? It's not 1975. There's a big projector screen. There's a cell phone. There's a tiny little camera back there that gentleman's stooping under. I guess I'm being recorded. I shouldn't have been cursing so much. I'm sorry. Governor McCrory, please continue to fund Alamance Reads. He's not listening. But we could look around this room and we could gauge these things. The sooner you can place your reader in a setting, the better off you're going to be. But setting is a lot more than place. Setting is what gives rise to the people who inhabit a place. And so whenever I'm beginning a novel or a story, whether I'm writing or reading it, I'm trying to tick off things about the characters based on the place they inhabit. And some of those things are gender. Are these characters male or female? Race. Who are these characters? What is their ethnic background? Age. How old are they? Sexuality. Who do they like? Do they not like anybody? Are they too young to know? Education level. If you're 12 and you're in the 12th grade, you're a genius. If you're 22 and you're in the 12th grade, you're probably not, right? That education level tells us something very valuable. Social class. Where you come from and what you've come through tells us a lot about who you are. Religious background tells us a lot about who you are. When my first novel came out, I got interviewed in USA Today, and it was a very long phone interview. And I was like, man, that's a big newspaper. It's my break, this is going to give me a lot of mileage. And the interviewer was like, so you moved to Louisiana, what were some of the shocks? And I was talking about the weather and the landscape and all this stuff. And I said, I was raised Protestant in a Baptist church, and I never met a Catholic person until I moved to Louisiana. It was a very strange thing. And then the food and the music, just saying very intelligent things. And then the USA Today story came out, and it was Wiley Cash. I had never met nobody Catholic till I moved to Louisiana, and that was the only quote from me they put in my article. Right? I sound like a hillbilly. I thought the Pope was the president of a country called Catholic till I moved to Louisiana. So your religious background says something about who you are, what you've come from, what you've embraced, what you've turned against, how you view certain things. Your political affiliation says something about who you are, what you value, how you line yourself up. Are you conservative? Are you liberal? How do you see yourself? Are you indifferent? How do you see yourself? Then you have obvious things like country. What country are you from? I'm from America. Where? Just the southern part of it. Can you be more specific? North Carolina. What part of North Carolina? If you're looking at a map, it's about a third of the way. I'm from Gastonia, right? What's that like? It's in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Oh, that's very specific. So your country is specific to you. Your state is specific to you. The region of the state, especially a state like North Carolina, like holy moly, could Western North Carolina and Eastern North Carolina be any more different? I mean, they'll like come to blows over barbecue. I mean, give me a break. Like, can two places be more different? The language, the geography, everything about those places is different. And then the era, the time in which things are set, are very important. How can you get your reader there as quickly as possible? So, when I started writing This Dark Road to Mercy, I was thinking about those things. I was thinking about gender, race, age, sexuality, education, social class, religion, politics, country, state, region, era. I wanted the reader to know those things about Easter Quilby as quickly as possible. I wanted them to understand not only who she was, but how she viewed who she was through her own eyes. So I want to read a little bit of the novel. So for those of you who haven't read it, this will give you a jump. And for those of you who have read it, you can just drift off for a few minutes, catch some sleep. But this is how the novel opens. Wade disappeared on us when I was 9 years old, and then he showed up out of nowhere the year I turned 12. By then I'd spent nearly 3 years listening to Mom blame him for everything from the lights getting turned off to me and Ruby not having new shoes to wear to school. And by the time he came back, I'd already decided that he was the loser she'd always said he was. But it turns out he was much more than that. He was also a thief. And if I'd known what kind of people were looking for him, I never would let him take me and my little sister out of Gastonia, North Carolina. My earliest memories of Wade are from my mom taking me to the baseball stadium at Sims Field back before she died. She'd point to the field and say, "There's your daddy, right there." I wasn't any older than 3 or 4, but I can still remember staring out at the infield where all the men looked the exact same in their uniforms, wondering how I would ever spot my daddy at a baseball game if he looked just like everybody else. It's funny to think about that now, because on the day he decided to come back for us, I knew Wade as soon as I saw him sitting up in the bleachers down the first base line. I'd always called him Wade because it never felt right to think of him as Dad or Daddy or anything else kids are supposed to call their parents. Parents who got called things like that did stuff for their kids that I couldn't ever imagine Wade doing for us. All he'd ever done for me was give me a baby sister named Ruby and enough stories for my mom to spend the rest of her life telling. But she ended up dying just before I turned 12, which was the only reason Wade came looking for me and Ruby in the first place. I just made it to third base, and I had no problem acting like I didn't see him sitting up there. My eyes raised themselves just enough to spot Ruby sitting on the bench, waiting on her turn to kick. She had her back to the bleachers and hadn't seen him yet. She might not even have recognized him if she did. To look at Ruby and Wade, you wouldn't even know they were related, but you could have said the same thing about me and her. Ruby looked just like Mom. She had long, dark hair, dark eyes, and dark skin, even in the wintertime. I was just the opposite. My hair was strawberry blonde and straight as a board. My skin was more likely to burn and freckle than tan. Ruby was beautiful. She always had been. I looked just like Wade. The bleachers were empty except for him, and I looked around the field and saw that none of the other kids had noticed him yet. Up the hill on my right, Mrs. Hannah and Mrs. Davis stood talking out on the playground. Neither of them had seen him yet, but I didn't have to wait long for somebody to spot him. "Look at that man up there," Selena said. She was playing third base and stood bent over with her hands on her knees. She was black just like most of the kids we stayed with after school and just about all the kids we lived with at the home. Her hair was fixed in thick braids with bands that had marbles on them. They clinked together when she moved her head. I'd wanted to ask her to fix my hair just like hers, but my hair was too thin to stay in braids, which was fine with me because Selena was taller than me and seemed a lot older than me too, and I was always too nervous to talk to her. "Why is he just sitting there watching us?" she asked. I didn't know if she was talking to me or if she was just talking to herself out loud. "I don't know," I finally said. She looked over at me like she'd forgotten I was standing on base beside her. I said a little prayer that she wouldn't mention nothing about me and Wade looking alike, and I found myself wishing again that I looked more like Mom, like Ruby. A third grader named Greg stepped up to the plate, and even though something told me I shouldn't do it, I ran toward home as soon as he kicked it. The ball didn't do nothing but roll right back to the pitcher, and I got thrown out at the plate. I headed for the bench, but I kept my head down and didn't look up at the bleachers. My face felt hot, and I knew it had gone red, and I made myself believe I was embarrassed only because I'd been thrown out at home, not because it had all happened in front of Wade. Ruby sat by herself on the end of the bench, swinging her feet back and forth. When I got closer, she moved that dark hair behind her ears and stuck out her hand and waited for me. "High five," she said. I sat down beside her without saying anything, and then I bent over and dusted off my shoes. Ruby left her hand hanging just above my knees. "High five," she said again. "It's only a high five when it's up high," I said. "All right," she said, "low five then." I gave her palm a little slap, and I looked up and saw Marcus watching me from the infield at second. He was wearing a white Cubs jersey with Sammy Sosa's number and name on the back. The school year had just started, and it was only the third Friday in August, but Mark McGwire already had 51 home runs to Sosa's 48. Me and Marcus were both rooting for Sosa to get to 62 and break Roger Maris's record first. He smiled at me, but I looked away like I hadn't seen him. It made me nervous, and I pulled my hair back in a ponytail and let it drop to my shoulders. When I looked up at Marcus again, he was still smiling. I couldn't help but smile a little bit too. And then I heard a voice whisper my name. "Hey," it said, "Easter." It was Wade. And so that's how the novel opens. So what are some things we know about Easter from her narration? Does she ever come to the page and say, "I am Easter. I am white. I am this age. I like boys"? What does she say? What kinds of things does she do?
She talks about how her hair is thin and how that separates her from a black girl that she at school with.
Absolutely. She has thin hair, and her sister Ruby is also white, but she has thicker hair. But Easter is pale. She's more likely to burn and freckle than get a tan. She looks just like Wade, so it means her father is white and she is white. But she never says, "I am white and I have red hair." She never is that obvious, because we do not speak that way. We do not tell stories that way. We do not refer to ourselves that way. We know she's 12 because her father disappeared when she was 9 and he came back 3 years later. 3 plus 9 is 12. He is now back. She's 12 years old. She never says, "I am 12 years old." We know she has a crush on this boy Marcus, but she doesn't quite, wanting to know maybe, or maybe she doesn't want anybody else to know. Later on in the book, you kind of find that out. What is her education level? What is 12 years old? 6th grade, yeah, she's in 6th grade. And when I went to school, elementary went kindergarten through 6, and then middle school was 7 through 9, and then high school was 10 through 12. I don't know what it is now. I want to say elementary school stops in 5th, is that? That's how it is now. But I set this at the school that I went to, Robinson Elementary in Gastonia, where I went to school. And this is the ball field that I grew up playing ball on. And it's the school that I grew up attending. So when Pruitt goes to the cafeteria, that's my cafeteria at Robinson Elementary. I went back kind of to the scene of the crime, literally, to remind myself of what that place looked like. As a matter of fact, I was back there 2 summers ago doing the commencement address at my high school. And my wife, we drove down from West Virginia, and she dropped me off in Gastonia and went on down to Columbia, South Carolina for a friend's birthday. And I was going to rent a car and drive down to Columbia to meet her. And she dropped me off at the car rental place. And the guy was like, "Man, the car you ordered, we don't have it." This is in Gastonia, keep in mind. "What we do have, you're going to love." And I was like, "Oh Lord, what is it?" It was a turquoise Camaro. I'm wearing a suit, going back to my high school to deliver the commencement address, in a turquoise Camaro with like New Jersey plates or something like that. He's like, "I drive it home sometimes at night just to drive it." I'm like, "Is that against the rules?" He's like, so I'm in my turquoise Camaro, and I'm driving around town with a little time to kill before I have to go deliver the commencement address. And I drive past my old elementary school. It's a Saturday morning, 10 a.m. I'm like, I'm going to go back to Robinson and just kind of walk around outside. It's summer, there's nobody there. So I park and I get out and I'm walking around. I'm like, gosh, so little of this has changed. This still feels the same to me. And I walk past the gymnasium and I think, gosh, I remember when they built this gymnasium, and I remember how it smelled. It smelled the same for years, and smell is our best sense of memory. And I was curious to know what it smelled like. So I tried the door, and it was unlocked. And I'm happy to report the gymnasium at Robinson Elementary smells the same as it did when I was in elementary school. I'm also happy to report that the alarm system is in very good working order at Robinson Elementary. And so while I was in the gym, I was like, what's that noise? And I went outside and there was a deafening siren going off. And my first thought was run. Right? Just run. Get in your turquoise Camaro with the New Jersey plates and just peel out, right? And then my second thought was, if you run, you're going to jail. I'm going to jail if I run. And so I just called 911 and said, hi, I set off the alarm at Robinson Elementary. And he's like, how'd you set it off? And he said, we got a signal, that the alarm company called us. How'd you set it off? And I said, well, I'm here to deliver the commencement address at my high school. He's like, this is an elementary school. Why are you there? And he said, do you have a child in school there? And I said, no, sir, I don't even live here, as a matter of fact. I'm just in town for a short time. And by the end of it, he was like laughing. He was like, this is the worst story I've ever heard. And he's like, I'll call the police and let them know, not to arrest you when they get there. As I'm going back to my car, the cop pulls up. Have to give him my same story. He's like looking at my plate. He's like, I see your registration. I'm like, this was a rental. Sorry. He's like, can I look in the trunk? And I was like, I guess, but I haven't looked at it. I don't know what's in there, so I hope nothing bad, I hope nothing bad from the previous renter. And it ended up letting me go. And as I was leaving the parking lot, my wife called. She was like, good luck at your speech. What's that noise? And I was like, that's the alarm. She was like, at what? I was like, I set off the alarm at my elementary school. She was like, I'm going to let you go. She just didn't even ask. She was not even like, what happened? She was like, I'll just see you tonight when you get here. You can tell me about this then. But that's how real I wanted this to feel. I wanted this place to feel real. And I wanted to nail these things down about Easter. So she is a young girl. She is white. She is 12. She likes Marcus. She's in the 6th grade. What is her social class? Low. She remembers stories of her mom telling her why the lights are getting turned off, why they don't have new shoes to wear to school. It's because of Wade. They're poor. They don't have anything. And that's borne out later on in the novel. What is her religion? This is Gastonia. Probably Baptist, probably maybe Methodist, I don't know. Definitely not Presbyterian, definitely not Episcopal, definitely not Catholic, because I had never met a Catholic. Until Easter didn't meet no Catholics, so she went to Louisiana. Politics, she's 12, probably isn't very aware of that kind of thing, but it's 1998, Clinton's in the White House, Lewinsky scandals going on around this time, so the air is rife with political discord. Country, clearly United States. The state, she says North Carolina. The region, she says Gastonia. And the era, what's the era? 1998 is the home run race between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa that happened in the summer of 1998, so we know the season as well. And so I wanted to nail these things, like when you throw darts at a dartboard, I wanted to nail all of these things as soon as possible so that the reader knew exactly what they were getting into and how to have a foothold, to know exactly who this little girl is, where she's from, and what her life's like as they move forward, to get those things out of the way as quickly as possible. I didn't want the reader to be reading like this, like, who's speaking? Is this a boy or a girl? I didn't want that to happen. And so it was very important to me to nail those things down as quickly as possible. And I tried to do that in my first novel as well, which you're all going to love when you read it. So, does anybody, we have like 10 minutes left, does anybody have any more questions about? Yes, ma'am.
I want to ask about Easter's name.
Okay.
What does that tell us?
What does Easter tell us? Well, that was her mom's favorite holiday. That name came, Easter and Ruby both came. I wrote a story years ago that had two little girls in it named Easter and Ruby. And I just loved those names. I thought they were just innocent and sweet, and I wanted these little girls to feel that way as well. And so I just kind of recycled those names from a short story I wrote years ago. But I don't know that the name necessarily has any religious significance. But that being said, if a literary critic or a theorist wrote about this novel and talked about Easter in terms of resurrection, that's a valid argument, and that's what literary theorists do. You know, they look at a text and say, in many ways, I'm going to take the author out of this and kind of remove his intent, and I'm going to plumb this text to see what comes out, you know, break it down and see what comes out of it. Yes, ma'am.
How do you plot your stories? Like, do you know the whole story from beginning to end before you actually write?
No. With both novels, and the novel I'm working on now, I have no idea how it's going to end. I have no clue how it's going to end. With both novels, I thought I was done before I was done. So I sent off the manuscript of both novels. I sent Landmark Highland home to my agent. He's like, it's not done. You need to bring Adelaide, the woman, you need to bring her voice back in the end and kind of sew things up. And I thought, that is the dumbest idea. I'm only going to do this to show him what a bad idea that is. And it's like my favorite part of the book. And then with This Dark Road to Mercy, it originally ended in St. Louis. And it just didn't feel done. And then it ended in the park. And then that didn't feel done. And then it ended somewhere else. And you just keep going. So I never know. Now with Dark Road, I knew I was working against the home run race. And all those dates are accurate. You know, the teams they're playing, the pitchers who pitched, all those things are accurate. So I knew I was pacing time in the novel against the waning days of the race. And so that gave me some level of structure. That gave me some measure of structure. And I knew I wanted them to be in particular cities on particular times. And so that was about as close to plotting as I did. Yeah, in the back.
Can you talk a little bit about, in both your novels, you have at least one character who's telling a story who's very young, and some of the challenges, constraints of that, and you obviously do it very naturally, you do a really nice job of that, so can you tell about how you had some success with that?
Sure, yeah, he asked about young narrators. I think young narrators are great because they'll say the truth, they don't really hold things back, but they also don't understand everything of what they see. And a lot of tension in our lives comes from not understanding what we see, like not telling adults things we should tell adults, especially in the first book. With Easter, not understanding her father in a way that may allow her to embrace him a little bit more. And so I like having child narrators because they complicate yet simplify. And I really like trying to get their voices right. And there are so many great models of child narrators, like we talked about it last night, Kate Gibbons' novel, Ellen Foster, To Kill a Mockingbird. Fred Chappell has a beautiful novel. He's a North Carolina writer called I'm One of You Forever. It's just like the most gorgeous novel with the child narrator. And so I really like using child narrators because they're emotional, they're close to the bone, they're honest. And so you have other narrators and you bring them in to kind of be a little cooler narrator, a little more measured, not quite as emotional. Yes?
How do you get the full-time commitment to your story instead of just writing the first thing you want to write?
Yeah.
Committing and writing all the little things in between.
You must be a writer. Yeah. That's the kind of question a writer would ask. She asks, how do I make a commitment to writing the things in the story that aren't fun? Yeah. Well, writing's not very fun. For me. I mean, it's like a job, you know, like you drill holes in sheet metal, you go to work, you sit at the desk and write. So how do I write the things that aren't fun? You know, and the things that aren't fun sometimes are the hardest. I have a hard time with, the best writing is going to have 5 elements. So if you're a writer, you just, something to keep in mind. 5 elements: dialogue, exposition, which is context, past stuff, you know, Easter's telling about her past. So dialogue, exposition, description, interiority, which is your thoughts, the character's thoughts, and narration. And narration is what people are doing in a scene. Do I sit down in a chair while I'm talking? Do I open this book and close it? Do I take a sip of water? That's narration. It's like stage directions. sometimes narration is moving someone from point A to point B, getting somebody out of a car into a store. I hate that stuff. I hate that stuff. But you can't just have them suddenly be driving and then the next sentence be in a store, right? Because the reader's like, whoa, whoa! And then the reader's, you want your writing to be a dream that's not going to wake the reader. So you try to keep the dream as being as unruffled as possible. So you don't want those huge shifts. And so what I like to do is think about my life. How do I move from space to space? What can I have that character doing as they move from space to space? Look at somebody and make eye contact, and they learn something about the world, and they look at their watch and see what time it is. And it makes them less boring, you know. But if you want to just write the exciting stuff, then you're stuck with nothing to look forward to. And I try to write chronologically, start at the beginning and write toward the end, and not try to jump around so much. But I'll take notes on those scenes that are going to be really interesting. And I'll jot down notes of what I know is going to come later on. That's a good question, though. Yes, ma'am.
How much do your editors change what you wrote, and do you disagree with them? Do you have a little back and forth?
She asked how much do my editors change things that I've written. They don't really change it. I have a great editor. He's actually from Raleigh. He's with HarperCollins. I just have one editor, yeah. And he's been with me for 4 books. He'll be with me through 2 more books. He doesn't change stuff. Like, he can't wholesale just change my book. Yeah. So, but what he'll do is he'll say, I've read what you sent. He'll always say, I liked it. It's great. It's great. It's great. But I was thinking, you know, and he'll make suggestions, and sometimes he'll say, don't even think about what I'm saying. Just listen to what I'm saying, and then think about it later. Just don't even think about it. So he'll suggest things, and sometimes I'll try it just to see. Because the great thing about writing is there's nothing that you can't undo. You just keep those drafts. You know, it's not like your editor, you're carving a statue, and your editor is like, take a little bit off there, and then the arm falls off, and you're like, no, I gotta start over. And he's like, sorry. You know, that's not, writing's not that extreme. And so we always consult, but I go from my wife reads everything first, then my agent gets it, and he's really hands-on. And then my editor gets it last. And so it's pretty finished when he gets it. And so when it gets to my editor, we're looking at big idea stuff. We're looking at emotional resonance, we're looking at theme, we're looking at big, how to turn things up, how to turn things down. We're not so much looking at the minutiae of what my wife's going to look at. Yeah. But it's a dance. It's definitely a dance. Everything is a dance in this business. Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to several instructors, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, at least, who are, we're all teaching several sections. And one key instructor does not keep their teaching off their teaching. Is there a message you'd like for us to give our students? They're also going to be writing an essay.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure.
We're going to be teaching it for semesters to come.
You know, I think that when I write, I try to uncover something. Like, I don't try to impart a lesson by any means. Just a sweet message. Tell your friends. No. What I try to get people to think about. Like, I'm not. It's like when I teach. I'll tell my students, like, I don't want you. By the end of the semester, especially in writing classes, like, I don't want you to know what my politics are, but I want you to be able to support yours better through argument, right? And so when I write a book, I'm not so interested in getting the reader to see the world the same way I see the world. I just want the reader to see the world. You know, just be willing to look at something that they might not otherwise have looked at. And so for my first 2 books, I was really thinking about my 2 books. I was really thinking about seeming versus being. And the motto of North Carolina is to be rather than to seem. And my first novels have a lot of seeming and not a lot of being in them. So Wade seems like a total loser. Maybe he's not. You know, maybe he really doesn't want to be. Pruitt seems like this vindictive psycho, but maybe there's some value in his anger. Maybe there's something there at the base of it that if somebody had stepped in, it wouldn't have been that way. You know, Easter and Ruby's fate seems hopeless, but maybe it's not. You know, Brady seems like he's washed up and that he's going to do the wrong thing or the right thing. Maybe he's not, you know. And to just ask ourselves, why do we believe so much of what we believe? And with my first novel, especially with this preacher, you know, people all the time tell me like, I don't believe anybody would follow a preacher like that. And I'll say, oh, so you must never have heard of Jim Bakker, Ted Haggard, Jerry Falwell, Jimmy Swaggart. You must never heard of these, Bernie Madoff, John Edwards. You must have never heard of these people, right? Oh, I guess that is true. You know, and so why are we willing to believe what we believe, and why are we willing to follow what we follow? That's what I really want people to think about. And this novel that I'm working on now is about a mill strike in 1929 in my hometown that I grew up. It was on the front page of every newspaper in the world at one time, and I grew up knowing nothing about it because it had been swept under the rug and buried. Nobody talked about it. And why not? You know, why was I not taught about that? My family, they grew up in the mills, you know, but we never knew about this. And so to uncover the world is, I think, what I would want to talk about.
When you write, do you try to outline your story and then write it, or do you just write as it comes to you? And which one would you suggest would be the right way?
I think it's hard to say. I think some people do things differently. I have the same agent that a writer named James Elroy has, who wrote Black Dahlia and LA Confidential and all these like Los Angeles crime novels. Before he starts writing a novel, he gives my agent like a 900-page outline of the novel that's going to be 500 pages, you know. That's not me. I'm more inclined to like hear a voice, see a scene, and just start kind of playing. Just kind of write with like one ear toward the screen or one ear toward the voice that's speaking, and just kind of play with it. And then at the end, try to bring some kind of structure to it. Yes, ma'am.
Do you edit yourself a lot? Do you write full scenes and then say, okay?
Yeah, I do, yeah. Well, my first, and Dark Road, there were like over 100 pages that were cut from that novel. And then my first novel, there was like a whole narrator that was cut from that. Yeah, sure, yeah. But you know the saying, kill your darlings? If you love something and you still cut it, that was the right decision. I type on the computer, yeah, I type on the laptop. Yes, ma'am. I don't know, you know, people have asked me that, and I always, with my first book, people have asked me that, and I said, no, I'll never write a sequel, but now I'm thinking about a sequel for the first one, so maybe with this one I would, I don't know, I can't say no. So we'll see, It would be interesting to know. Well, thank y'all so much. You've been a great audience, and this has been a wonderful experience for me.